Hey, Mr. Crowley here for AP Environmental Science. Hope you're all doing all right. All right, so let me get started here. If you take a look at the picture here, we're looking at a wind turbine, and wind turbines are associated with renewable energy. All right, so we're going to be talking about renewable and non-renewable. And this happens to be an old post from my Instagram. And you can see here, this is actually taken down in Point Lookout at a town of Hempstead facility where they have solar panels, they have that wind turbine, they have a hydrogen fuel cell fueling station that they use for some of their vehicles, in addition to other things. All right, so things that we will discuss in addition to those non-renewables. Remember, can't live without the non-renewables. They're very important in so many aspects, as we'll see, or we have already seen. So are the renewables. Hello. So I think we're back on here, and let me put it on present. All right, so you can see the full screen there, and you can see this right here just breaks up U.S. energy consumption, right? And all the big non-renewables are all located along here, right? Petroleum. That's basically where you're getting your gasoline from. Okay, your diesel, right? Even your petroleum products, right? If you use Vaseline, that's actually coming from petroleum. Okay, natural gas, right? Natural gas, which is methane. It's a in the gaseous form, right? Your stove runs on it. Some of the buses run on it. Some cars run on it. Most cars run on gasoline made from petroleum, though. Okay, and you got coal, right? Coal, whew, energy dense. Nuclear energy, not in my backyard, but as some of you saw, maybe not so bad. And then there's this 11% renewable. So, here, 2017, 11% renewable, right? Globally, it's maybe 19 or 20%, I think some of you reported. But in the United States, about 11%. And it's only growing about 1% every 1 or 2 years, all right? So let me pause for a minute. Okay, so yeah, basically, we were saying, the renewables make up the 11%. Globally, it's, maybe closer to 20%. And keep in mind, though, maybe some countries are using more renewables, solar, wind, geothermal, biofuels. But keep in mind, there's a lot of countries that are still using wood as their source for fuel, for cooking, for heating, whatever it might be. And if those trees are not harvested sustainably, then I think we're defeating the purpose. So that's just something to think about, right? And you need to think about those countries that maybe are using the wood, and maybe they just don't have the access like we do, and they don't have the regulations like we do. All right, but so if you're harvesting wood unsustainably, probably not the best. And remember, it's all about pros and cons. We're not saying, oh, never use petroleum, only use solar, right? Or, vice versa, right? It's probably this integration that we're looking at, right? As we bring in more of these renewables, we're still going to need a lot of these non-renewables. And probably more importantly, it's the efficiency of each of these, right? I mean, think about a car in 1950 compared to a car in 2020, right? The efficiency of the cars now, the standards, what they call the CAFE standards, are much, much higher. The mile per gallon, as some of you have reported, are significantly higher now per gallon, right? I don't know. Some of your cars are probably getting 25, 35 miles per gallon, and that's only going to increase compared to maybe 1950. The average car was maybe only getting, 10 to 15 miles per gallon, right? So it's these making things more efficient, right, and conserving, right? All kidding aside, I'm actually wearing a hat. I'm wearing the hat because my hair is a mess, and a shirt here that I thrifted, right? Well, think about the idea behind reusing something, right? Instead of just discarding it, I'm reusing something that someone else had. And I guess the idea behind that is that it's putting less pressure on these non-renewables to mine the product, to grow the product, whatever it is, to transport the product. etc., etc., etc. Okay, so I'm going to transition you to a few videos of me at a gas station, and it's kind of like an overriding theme throughout. Hey guys, how are you? Mr. Crowley here for AP Environmental Science. Yeah, if you haven't figured out already, I am at the gas pump loading up my gas-guzzling all-wheel drive minivan, all right? And I'm here for a reason, because we're talking about non-renewables and renewables. And I'm going to point something out to you. So if you've filled up gas before, maybe, just maybe, you've seen this before. Contains 10% ethanol. And some of you, maybe, were asking, really, what does that mean? Well, you've learned a little bit about corn to ethanol. Well, in this country, we take that corn oil from the corn, and turn it into a gas known as ethanol. And we add it to our refined fuels. So in AP Environmental Science, we're always trying to find the pros and cons of everything, right? So here we're talking about, well, a non-renewable and a renewable, and that 10% ethanol falls into a biofuel, and that's really considered a renewable, because we grow corn, we extract the oil, we refine that oil and turn it into an ethanol. The 90% actually falls into like the petroleum that we mine out of the ground, which is a non-renewable. So back to the pros and cons. And here, the pros and cons of corn to ethanol, or ethanol in general. We'll stick corn to ethanol because in this country, we grow a lot of corn to make this ethanol that we can mix with our gasolines. And hey, that sounds great. Domestic, renewable. Wow, that is awesome. Creates jobs, so economically it's like a great thing. But what are the cons? What are the disadvantages of these fuels? So take a minute, think about it. You got to grow a lot of corn. And when you grow things, think about all the things that go into that. I think I said it before, not all fuels are created equal. So the energy output for what you put into it isn't always equal. Like coal, remember coal? Wow, really dense, like great as far as energy. Disadvantages, yes, I know, let's settle down. But now, here we're talking about something that takes a lot of energy to make, and you don't get a lot of energy back out of it. And that's something we're not too happy about. So what are we talking about? Let me just enlarge this presentation here, okay? So, and let me move my screen picture. Hi, how are you? Okay, so I'm up over there. So we're talking about the EROEI, okay? The EROE, okay? Which is the energy return divided by the energy investment. Now, no calculations here, so don't worry about it. But what you have to recognize is that what are companies investing to mine to make these fuels, right? Versus what are they getting in return? So we talk coal, wow, so energy dense, right? And not difficult to mine. So if you go down here, coal, right, has a high number, 80. That's great economically. That's like awesome, right? Look at this, hydroelectric, 100. Holy mackerel! Scrolling down, oil production in general, 20. Not bad. Although in the 70s it was at 30, all right? And it has dropped over time. You can't see this because I think that's covering the screen. World oil production's at 35. This is a few years old though too, so things have changed. But you see some of the numbers, some of the like the biofuels, all right? The ethanol corn, 1.3, that's very low. So they're putting a lot of money into making the corn into an ethanol and not getting a lot back. And the bottom line is anything one or less economically isn't worth it, okay? Forget about the impact on the environment. Well, no, don't forget about the impact on the environment because, we know all these have major impacts like hydroelectric. like, wow, like why isn't everything hydroelectric if it's, the output and the returns are so high for what they're investing? Well, remember, there's major environmental impacts with hydroelectric, and just the cost of initially building it. Nuclear 10, and notice the difference between ethanol from sugarcane versus corn. It's much higher, and there's probably a reason for that, right? If I could pause this, I would. And so once again, the high numbers, right? The return on the investment is outstanding, right? And so this is more of just like pure economics. We're not talking about the environment, not any kind of impact on society. We're just talking economics here, okay? And we do have to look at the impacts on society. We have to look at the impacts on the environment as well, all right? And those are things that go in with the pros and cons of all these different things, and I have here, it says, right, it says, why has the EROEI for oil declined over time? Think about that. Think about the operations required to mine oil, right? We're going deeper in the ground. We're traveling further to find this oil and so forth. Technology has improved, but we're trying to find reserves deeper underground in more remote places. Like, right, we're starting to mine up in northern Alaska, in the tundra, right? In the Here's a slide I'm talking about here with the Arctic National Wild Refuge, and you can see we're starting to open up mining operations in these wilderness areas, which we know environmentally it's probably not the best thing, but we're going further. We're trying to keep it domestic. All right, we're creating jobs. All right, so all these things, these pros and cons, we need to look at. All right, so I just wanted to share that with you. Here's another one just with the tar sands, because remember, we can mine the tar sands. We can cook out that oil from the sand, and they're being mined up here in Canada. And then we pump that refined, unrefined oil to some of our refining plants throughout the country. A lot down over in here in Texas, in like Houston, also in Louisiana, through. Maybe you've heard of the Keystone Pipeline. And once again, tar sands, the return on them are much lower because it's so energy intensive to extract that oil from the sands. And then the pipeline, a whole other issue, right? Do you really want to pipe transporting oil running through your backyard, your local park? By the way, the tar sands are up here at 3, all right? A little bit better than the corn to ethanol, but still very low. 3 compared to, 15, 20, whatever conventional oil mining and refining requires. Okay, so that's just something. So the last thing on here is ethanol from corn, a good fuel choice. It's domestic. We're having people in agriculture grow the corn. It's creating jobs, right? But what are some of the negative effects, especially on the environment, right? To grow that corn, what do you need? Oh, fertilizer. Corn requires a ton of fertilizer. NPK, right? Nitrogen, all right, and phosphorus specifically, they are the contributors to these huge algal blooms that we see happening in so many of our lakes and bodies of water. And specifically, we're growing a lot of this in the Mississippi Valley. So a lot of that runoff is ending up in the Mississippi River and down, finally, in the Gulf of Mexico, creating these huge dead zones. All right. So think about, you're someone in business in Louisiana. I don't know. You have a boat where you go out and you fish, and where you fish, there's always these dead zones, and the water's polluted, and there's nothing available. Okay, so here is a table. Let's get that up. And any day now, boom, there it is. Okay, so how green are your biofuels, right? And the red is usually not a good sign, okay? And corn to ethanol is red across the board from greenhouse emissions, all right, to all the other stuff that's required. We know corn requires a lot of water to grow, all right? We were just talking about the fertilizers. Oh, yes, and those pesticides, right? Let's keep the bugs and stuff away, right? Because we don't want them eating the corn, and it's just very energy intensive. Agriculturally, you've got to use heavy equipment and so forth, and it's yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you can see here, right? And if you notice, all right, we just go down the list. Oh, this other one, switchgrass, which is a perennial. It grows naturally and doesn't have to be replanted and so forth. And you can see is significantly lower across the board. The technology isn't quite there yet in converting it to ethanol, but they're working on it. You can see here, algae is another one. I think that it's the research and development is coming along, and I think we'll see more biofuels being created from algae, and there'll be a lot more opportunities with that and so forth. Sugarcane we just generally don't grow; it's more of a tropical plant, so we'll see that in other parts of more of the tropical zones and so forth. And then some of these other ones we probably can grow. All right, but yeah, just Oh, and then yeah, I'm sorry, all the different pros and cons and so forth. Okay, so let me just get my screen canceled here. So I know this is already going longer than you probably had hoped for. So I'm not going to go into every little detail here. You've been finding the pros and cons. You guys have been doing a nice job with that, with the different assignments and so forth. The pros and cons for both the renewable and the non-renewable, right? And just some things to think about. I mean, we already spoke a lot about hydroelectric earlier in the year, and just think about the different technologies and as they move along. Solar, right? We're limited to when the sun shines and the angle of that sun, right? We know wintertime sun here in New York isn't equal to the summertime sun, right? So you're going to be able to produce a lot more electricity with those solar panels, and the storage of it, right? Thankfully, we have people like Elon Musk, who companies that he's created, like Tesla, who are creating somewhat affordable storage for the electricity generated throughout the day. Same thing with wind. Uh, Geothermal. People do it. It's very expensive. You can do it even in areas where maybe there's not hydrothermal vents coming in from like tectonic activity. We have geothermal operations right here on Long Island, right? But on a smaller scale. The biomass waste, that's referring more to like just the breakdown of organic matter in some of the landfills, some of farming, agricultural practices with animal waste, corn, cow waste, cow poopy, right? They can put those in digesters, and methane is a byproduct, right? So you can capture that methane and use it as a fuel, which is kind of cool. We talked a little bit about the biofuels, mentioned a little bit about the wood there. All right. Yeah, I mean, so those are the renewables. All right. And I think the other one, when we talk about hydroelectric, using the tides, the moving back and forth of the tides, the up and down of the tides, capturing that energy and so forth. New York City actually uses that. I don't see why we can't use it on Long Island. But once again, pros and cons, right? Think about like what might be a pro and a con for something like that. We see these wind farms growing. Before you know it, we'll have wind farms right off of Long Island. So wind is another great option. Very expensive for the initial cost, but it seems to be pretty good source of renewable energy. Another cool one, like I said earlier, Town of Hempstead uses it. It's the hydrogen fuel. So basically, think back to maybe chemistry where you were able to split H2O, split water, and you'd make hydrogen and oxygen, right? And hydrogen, woo, um, uh, very boom, explosive, right? So what do? We put that, we compress that, and we put that in a fuel tank, a specially designed fuel tank, and the byproduct of that is water, right? So you're not getting carbon dioxide out of the exhaust pipes and so forth. But it's limited and it's very expensive. Um, Okay, so I'm going to end with this slide here, and I'm sure we went too long already, but you can see here's a little Tesla car, an electric car, plug-in car, and so forth. Believe it or not, these shingles on the roof are actual solar panels. So you can see the appearance, the aesthetics of solar panels have really come a long way. Right there, that's a little storage battery. So they can store some of the energy created during the day in these little battery packs and so forth. It's very expensive, the whole setup here, I know, but remember, prices will come down eventually. And it's remember you're trying to integrate them and make things as efficient as possible. Hope you enjoyed this little screencast. Right? Still learning. Any questions, concerns, please reach out. Miss you guys. Hope everyone's well. We'll see you soon.